Very much in the news today. There's no place that you look that you don't come across the topic of people who have been displaced and uprooted from their homes. Her thesis committee was comprised of Jana Vandergood, Ronit Eisenbach, and myself. It's all yours.
Hi everyone. I would first like to start by thanking my chair, Jana Vandergood, for her guidance throughout this entire process and for also allowing me to see things from a completely different perspective. I'd also like to thank my committee, Professor Brian Kelly, Professor Tillman, as well as Professor Eisenbach. And most importantly, I would like to thank my family and my friends, without whom I would not be standing here today. So with that, I would like to begin with a series of images. I'm sure many of you have seen these images throughout the news and media, so much so that we're almost desensitized to the traumatic nature of these images. And anytime the connotation of migration occurs in terms of the built infrastructure, there's usually a political or economic lens that we look through in terms of walls and barriers, even though displacement is an issue that's inherently human. So my topic deals with that concept of displacement, placemaking for the uprooted. And so looking at the history of migration is essentially a history of human adaptation into different geographies. Migration is a cultural catalyst. It has been seen in the golden ages of many societies. But once again, there's this lack of architectural precedent successfully accommodating newcomers coming into these new geographies. And just looking at how there are more people migrating today than at any other point in world history, just 258 million migrants in 2017, but also how the number of borders and barriers has risen throughout the years. So this thesis starts to look at that lens and how the process of assimilation into a new geography can be mediated through architecture and open up a conversation about belonging, movement, memory, and hybridization. And so one of the first things that the displaced person loses is this sense of home. And there's different ways that architects have expressed their beliefs about what it means to create a home. Bachelard takes the house as a tool for the analysis of the human soul, while Le Corbusier takes the house as a machine for living. So two starkly different approaches. But then also, what is a home and what does it create for you? So essentially, a home creates a sense of being, and place creates a sense of being. The displaced has this sense of being eradicated, and as a result, their sense of being might change, and their definition for what that sense of being might change as well. In the same way, the native has this home, and when they move into a foreign home, their sense of being has been displaced in a way, and essentially their home is neither here nor there. They're living within this third space. And that's described by this quote from Natasha, who says, "I had accepted my place as an outsider in America, but realizing that I was an outsider in Japan as well was heartbreaking." And so looking at that and what creates a home, it could be something that's rooted in geometry, but oftentimes it's something that we carry with us, the objects that we take as we travel, but also something that's more metaphysical in a way, the memories and the experiences we are living within these homes that we have created throughout our lives. And so because this topic is so inherently rooted in the human nature, my process for going about this thesis was having these interviews from different migrants and stories of the people who have been displaced and their take on what it means to be displaced and arrive at different places. And manifesting these interviews through this timeline, creating a sense of what the journey of the migrant is and manifesting that spatially. And then looking at different case studies and typologies of museums and memorials and which one of those typologies start to create that sense of empathy and sympathy within the visitor. So this is just a look at the timeline that I started in the beginning of my pro-thesis semester. On the top you can see the journey of the migrant. Just the idea of leaving can be manifested in architecture form as coming in from one threshold and stepping into the next. And the idea of that journey of the migrant, how that can manifest itself in a promenade through a building sequence. And so with that, creating, boiling down place into three different elements: boundary, how that building meets the edge orientation, how you're creating a sense of movement within the environment, and most importantly, a sense of community, how people are assimilating to the environment. And so with that, I'll move on to the site. Washington, D.C. was picked as the site for this thesis, not only because it has a large migrant population, but also because if there is a memorial or museum, D.C. would become the appropriate stage to elevate this dialogue. And while looking at some of the museums within the mall, I actually mapped out every museum, and Blagden Alley itself consists of an alley museum. And it was interesting to me as a site because it's something that's embedded within the urban fabric of the city, whereas the museums on the mall have a certain audience that come to them. So Blagden Alley itself was picked as the site for this thesis. And going on to the process of doing site analysis, it started to go hand in hand where the history of Blagden Alley has a history of displacement. There were African Americans living within these alley dwellings, and they had been forced out. And so you can see in some of the historic images, as well as today, the alley is starting to become this arts district, but there is gentrification, which is once again allowing some of the lower income African Americans to move out. And so looking at how the urban fabric of the site has changed from the 1800s to the present, it's the Walter E. Convention Center. And how the land use of the site has changed throughout time, especially the site itself is mainly residential with commercial on the edges, but recently there has been commercial sort of at the heart of the alley. And so taking this into account, another reason that Blagden Alley was chosen as the site was because it has this bus stop, which is bringing in a lot of people from out of state. So that idea of coming and going and accessibility to the site was very important. And looking at the different alleyways north and south of the site, Blagden Alley is the most preserved with the H formation, as well as the two empty lots which could potentially be used as sites for this thesis. So looking at the current land use and the proposed land use, you can see that north of the site is low density residential and south is high density residential. And then axonometrically, you can start to see how there are these inner spaces, almost like an inner city within that block, and how there is a drastic break within the urban fabric, going from row houses to 100 feet tall apartment buildings north and south of the site, but at the same time, east and west of the site, it is stable in that row house typology. So taking that into account, both of the sites right here are currently parking lots. Allowed me to see how I can test out my thesis in two different ways. One, having that dwelling for the displaced, and another being this open program, the gallery for displacement, something that will correlate more to the timeline of the migrant. And essentially taking that in plan view, you can start to see how the dwelling for the displaced and the gallery for the displaced are situated next to each other, but also how the people who are dwelling here can become curators for the gallery. This allowed me to create this node essentially as a market that would be sort of the communal space for both of these, the intersection of both of these sites.
Oh, thank you.
And looking at how architecturally some of the grids from both of these buildings can start to carry forward in each site, and that allows a sense of orientation from one building to the other. And then volumetrically, how those buildings may be extruded based on the program. So the dwelling building itself has this courtyard that is internalized. It's something where the migrants themselves will feel safe within the space, whereas the gallery is something that is porous and opens up and almost creates a side alley gallery, and whereas the market itself opens up to the plaza and creates this overall communal space outside of the main space of the market. And by doing those moves, it also allows a fourth programmatic element, which is the alley. So the alley becomes the gallery as we have this permeable wall here. It becomes a threshold from one building to another. It also becomes a plaza when the market opens up to it. And so just looking at that programmatically, how the dwelling for the displaced could have a dweller here, and they would have this journey to a bigger communal space but they will also have this sense of release throughout these spaces, whereas the Gallery of Displacement is something more in tune to the timeline, where you would have this different environment and this bar building situated within the site. And so quickly looking through the floor plans, you can start to see how there is this sense of entry, this series of this long promenade going to the market and opening up to the plaza, but also these porous openings along the way. And the Gallery of Displacement is essentially this grove of trees where you're entering this different environment and stepping into another as it starts to manifest the experience of the migrant. And then the dwelling has different types of unit typologies depending on families versus individuals staying within it. And one of the main components of this thesis was actually influenced by the characters and the interviews that I took. So I'll walk you through some of the major spaces based on the viewpoints of some of those characters. And a lot of these characters will be dwellers within the building itself, and you can start to see how the idea of objects being really prominent, something that you bring with you from home, is apparent within the section, but also the porous spaces and how it leads to a more communal gathering space of the market, which works with the site as it's a barrier from the street, and it starts to get lower where you reach Blackman Plaza. And so one of the characters is Drago. He's a refugee, and he's coming into DC, and he sees this massive structure. It's heavy and it's clad in brick, but at the same time it's starting to look at the building typology, and it's taking lines from the context of the building, so it's blending in with the urban fabric. But then there is this sense of sort of bearing walls. But as he walks inside, there's the sense of lightness, with the materiality being mainly wood, and a heart greeting him. So that idea of waiting is essential in the migration process, waiting for a green card, waiting to become Mrs. and before you enter into this social services component, as well as the court, which you can see in the background. But at the same time, having this long window to see that there is an end, which ends in the market. Kalmanan was another individual who is coming here from Thailand, and she's staying here to work, but then she also sends money back to her family. And one of the typologies that was effective for individuals was this double-height living room space with 3 bedrooms upstairs. So there would be different people living with her, and they all have their own bathrooms and closets, so that sense of privacy. But at the same time, they would have this communal space that they once again decorated with objects and foster this sense of home through the similar experiences that they have shared. And then looking at the Iyengars as these pioneers who've come here after they were married to start a family here. And one of the commodities that they took with them is this talent of cooking, and something that could manifest itself within the market space where they sell some of the food that they've cooked, but also exchange ideas. So the market as being this communal space, and also tying in with the dwelling with this brick facade and also this light wood structure in the inside. So architecturally tying it, but also in terms of the language. And then looking at how the warehouse is right now, so it would be adaptively reused so that there is glass garage doors opening up to Blackman Plaza, and also graffiti along the alley, so activating the alley as more of an art gallery, which already it is. And then looking at Albert, he's actually a resident of DC, and as he happens upon this edge, he starts to see these objects within the scaffolding, and he walks in, and there is this forest greeting him. And so this is the Gallery of Displacement, essentially. It is the more poetic part of the project, which starts to look at how you can manifest the idea of a migrant traveling in an architectural sense. So the idea that you're coming into one environment and walking into one that's conditioned. So the gallery space is essentially this bar building, which you can see in this axon here, where most of the artwork is. But the idea that the forest is an environment you're coming from and you're stepping inside, and it's the light that guides you throughout. So one of the migrants talks about how when she first arrived in the city, she remembers seeing these lights and it was beautiful, yet you felt a rush of loneliness. So something like light guiding you throughout this entire building, and then you walk upstairs to a cultural gallery, or downstairs to a more historical gallery talking about that idea of displacement, essentially a concrete box with light leading you throughout the building. And then at the end, you have this skylight that leads you back to where you started. So it's sort of coming back to where you arrived from in the first place.
I'm sorry. Go back, a skylight that brings me back.
So you start here.
Right.
Yeah, so it's like kind of like the entrance. Yeah.
Why don't you just walk through on the plan?
Okay. So you walk in here, and you go up to the second floor, and then there's skylight, and you walk back here to that main entrance.
So the skylight's over the stairs?
Yeah, the skylight's before the stairs.
It's in front of the elevator.
Yeah,
It's in the section, isn't it?
yeah, it's in the section right here.
I know I'm just being joking about it, but so it's like a marker, so it brings you back through.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes. And then finally, the Kaufman family was influential in this design because they talked about many memories that they made around a table that they had in Hong Kong. So that was something they had shipped from Hong Kong to America. So the idea of the marketplace wasn't something that was a programmatic element within my thesis, but based on these interviews, the second floor of the marketplace being this communal table, and food is something that we can all get along about, and having that be this sort of central space opening up to Blackman Plaza below. And just so looking at this thesis and how the idea of place is made, and place is manifested through the boundary conditions, how the dwelling is something that's welcoming and taking you into the building, and more permeable edge to the gallery, something that allows you to be interested and come into the gallery. And place is also manifested by how these components are sort of combined. The glazing, the scaffolding element from the gallery is something that can hold objects, but the same structural bay can start to become a trellis in the courtyard spaces, and the same bay can become that double skin facade for the market space. And so the sense of place is established, or sense of being established through community and the diversity of program within these spaces. But most importantly, the diversity of program and the interactions within these communities starts to establish that sense of belonging. And with that, I'd like to open up to questions and comments.
I'm glad you explained the idea of the wall and the scaffolding to the garden and to the gallery, because I think that could be a very powerful thing to have, tokens of people's journeys and evidence of these kind of journeys that people kind of endure in order to kind of arrive or to kind of find some sense of belonging. So I was wondering if you could talk about the significance of the grove. Sorry if I missed that.
Yeah, I guess one of the reasons that the grove was placed within this is thinking of how you would feel displaced within the urban environment is something that would be perhaps more natural. And also the idea that the architecture as a vessel rather than the architecture as an exhibit would be something that's more subtle in a way, not necessarily overtaking the entire site. So the grove goes with that idea of moving in, coming in from one environment and moving into a cool condition one another. So the idea of like the migrant leaving their homeland and moving into a space that's different, and it's a more of a threshold between that.
I mean, I could understand, if there were perhaps many paths leading there, but it seems like the entrance is fairly controlled.
Mm-hmm.
And then so I'm just wondering, it might be a little hard to find the entrance to the gallery,
Mm-hmm.
but
Which,
I'm also aware of the fact that, you know, people might come at it from different directions, but they might have different journeys.
Just to add to that, I like the sort of ephemeral nature of the scaffolding. It's almost, it's kind of akin to painting your memory onto something. It's there for, it has a temporal aspect to it. You know, it's there for the minute people come and see it. And it's not meant, even, there's a dichotomy of sort of like the people that are transient and wanting to paint a more sustained and solid memory of themselves or their future onto this very temporary thing that sort of could go away, which I find that very interesting. The other question I was going to ask is, as you come in from the main street, is there a connection to the market from the residential component at grade, on ground level, without going outside?
yeah, so
Is that throat piece there?
there's a connection on grade
Yeah,
to the
but
market.
right where that alley crosses over, is that exterior?
Which,
Yeah.
yeah, that's exterior space.
So what I think would be interesting is if it were continuous, because you painted the story of the guy sitting by the hearth, by the fireplace, that either is waiting for processing or something, or waiting to go upstairs to meet family members or whatnot, and having access to that market component and to the dining buffet experience that you painted on the second level.
Yeah, the dining one is continuous from the second floor.
Right,
It's just,
but without
yeah.
having to go outside, without having to sort of step outside into the elements and just sort of continue that. Once you've sort of been embraced, you know, you're sort of like this weary journeyman, right? If you're coming across seas and ocean, you've sort of entered this bosom of welcomeness, if you would. And just having it seamlessly connect programmatically to the market, I think could be pop, rather than thrusting you outside into the elements and then you have to go through another threshold to get into the market. I think I don't know, I think that may be an opportunity that you can sort of build on. But I also like the type of resident types that you have. I love those 3-bedroom units. And there could be different families in different rooms, and they have a communal space in that loft space. I think it's fabulous for these transient people. Now, what happens? What's the duration of their stay here? Is this a permanent? This is not a permanent dwelling for them. It's to get to the next step.
Yeah, essentially I didn't really think about like how long people would stay. It is that people who are staying here would be displaced. There are people who can stay here for a longer time, but essentially it's sort of this like transient nature where they're getting accommodated to work and their jobs, and then perhaps they would move on to a home.
Okay. So there'll be a work component to this where they might go outside of the community to work and then they just come here and sort of rest. Because the reason I'm asking is, you know, there's an influence, as you mentioned in your statistics, there's a whole population of people that are sort of being moved all over the globe, and creating a respite for them and not allowing the fluidity of sort of coming in, you spend 3 months or whatever, maybe that's the timeline, and you migrate into a much more stable setting. That sort of process, maybe it's not something that you've looked into, but I think it's a component of your piece that you can't ignore, because you're creating this holding point. You know, it's almost like it's not like customs, but it's sort of like a way to sort of arrive. I'm sorry.
Threshold.
A threshold, right?
And if it doesn't have that kind of structure, it doesn't remain a place for people who are migrants, right? So.
Thank you once again. I have the opportunity to see, appreciate another project, another year project, completely, you know, resolving in all aspects that I present today, with a lot of sensibility and very elegant way to communicate. You know, your presentation slide for the drawings is very clear, very elegant, very. So everything is very clear. But also, you know, the balance between the pre-existing building and the new building works very well. Even if it's 2 different languages, 2 different material, but you know, the building side, the sides, the dimension, the arrangement, the alignment works very well. Also the axis. It was not easy also because you manage, a lot of cubic meters, so it was not easy goal. I have a question about, just to figure out better your intervention. Why you call piazza or plaza the space behind the market?
The space?
Yes.
Because this space is starting to open up with the glass garage doors here, and there's also a coffee shop here, so it become this sort of internal plaza, not necessarily more of an external thing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So, can you talk about the building? I'm just noticing now that I'm squinting my eyes. If I were to sort of squint my eyes literally and look at the form of your building, the dwelling part, it's sort of like an E, right?
Yes.
What's the dimension of that second courtyard?
It should be around 10,
Not the
15.
main courtyard.
Yeah,
The
that is
second.
essentially a light well, because the units. So the units on. So the units above were becoming too sort of linear, so the light well was carved out so they could have dimensions that were accessible for 3-bedroom units.
I wonder if you actually made it a true E, so it's not a light bulb, and it's two courtyards. Because it kind of, again, it reminds me of these tenements that again, when you think of low income,
Yeah.
and so people that are disenfranchised, or sort of like, or maybe disenfranchised, not the right word, but people that are on a lower scale of economic viability, where historically they've sort of lived in these sort of almost warehoused environment where they're just packing out. That starts alluding to that I wonder, now, you're bringing them to the new world, right? You're sort of giving them potential opportunities and light and air and all that stuff. I would scoot that wing in the middle, south a little bit, and just make two courtyards as opposed to this really. I didn't notice it because I only thought you had one courtyard, but then I'm looking at your axon, I was like, wow, that could be quite, tenuous. So just something to think about.
Beautiful, beautiful presentation. Really powerful idea. I want to believe that that the scale of the building could do what you want it to do. So I'm wondering how many people you can accommodate, and I guess you have sort of. I love the idea that you interviewed different people. So you have single people, you have couples, you have families. How flexible are your residential units to accommodate? You kind of have to welcome and accommodate whoever comes in, whether they're single, family, couple. And to go with that, I wonder if your social services component is really big enough to, you want to sort of make these people feel welcome and comfortable, get them set up in a temporary housing situation, but you also want to help them get out to, job and a place to live and that sort of thing. So I think I don't know if it's any more than just that one piece on the first floor, but I think, and maybe those people live there, so that, this whole idea of being scared, being lonely, it's all new. It's nice if there's kind of services and people there 24/7 to.
Beautiful. I'm sort of struck with there's sort of aesthetics of not really telling us, making commitments about what you really like and what you're really interested in. I like the very simple, quiet spaces that aren't telling people how to live, and that's kind of fascinating. And then I'm thinking, but there are certain gestures you're making which are very strong and very clear, like staircases. And because you are clearly very much in control of what you're doing, I would have thought that's a chance to really explore a design venture. In the back of my mind, I may know Gunnar Asplund's staircase at the law courts in Gothenburg, how he designed them so that they were very slow, so that justice can take its time, and so the metaphor was. And I think that's very much in your realm. And since you're being very deliberate about a very few precious things like that become really important. The handrails, because they're necessary, but because you do think and you are aware of what and the tactility. Are they 3 foot? Are they 3'6" or 4? I see that, and then I see the way that you've represented elevations without really telling about them, so they're veiled. And I like that too, but I'm curious what the commitment is. And I'm wondering, is it tentative because you're not really sure, or is it tentative because you haven't really gotten time to it, or because you want them to be somewhat murky on the outside? Right around the elevations there's sort of this airbrushy, maybe it's glass, maybe it's translucent, maybe it's screened. That's one thing. Also in your gallery of displacement, why the diagonal suddenly? It's the only place it shows up. And it's not really a strong diagonal, but it's there, it's sort of limply done. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. I guess one of the reasons for the sort of lightness of it was because some of these components weren't as designed to that detail. So for instance, the scaffolding was just designed on different parts, but I wasn't showing it in terms of the whole nature. But also in terms of the detailing for the stairs, that's just something that I would explore further on, especially the way that it can tie in with the wood of the table, and that can start to correlate.
And furniture.
Yeah.
What's the purpose of that, the curator's gallery?
So the
Is
curator,
it public?
yes.
It is public. Interesting. Why two public galleries?
So the curator's gallery is essentially like this larger public space where they might be creating some of the artwork, like the light space, and then you would walk in, and it creates that threshold between this building and this building, so connecting both of those. And then
Who's creating the artwork in that gallery?
in that gallery, so it would be some of the dwellers.
So, okay, so again, sorry, I don't have to. Can I just?
One further thing, you've read Bachelor, and you've got the sort of top space, and then I'm looking here and I'm going, well, why are all the floors the same height? I mean, give me the attic, let it blow away, let it go on. Is there not a cellar? Is there not, I mean, you know this stuff. I don't know if you've been reading Heidegger as well, but, you know, explore those things, because, I mean, you've got a good hand on it, and you can certainly draw.
Yeah, this section is just cut before the loft, so these are like the light spaces here. It's just cut right before that.
But, you know, the attic can go up. It doesn't have to be a flat roof in the top. It can be something else. Particularly if you're walking upstairs and you're on the 5th floor and you've been dragging all the groceries and presumably a kid that's screaming and all that kind of stuff. You want to feel like you've arrived rather than just the same as the 4th or the 3rd.
And that also could inform the roof, because the roof is a place where you see the sky, and the sky connects you to wherever you're from. And so it feels like that could be a kind of procession vertically, and if you start playing with the form of the roof, because of the section of the rooms below, you also can start really developing that roof, because there's so much space there, and what a wonderful opportunity. That's in your next step.
And the gardens and whatever it could be.
So congratulations on an extremely well done project, and I think a very strong selection of site and thoughtful program. What I appreciate is you know the site very well. You understand the history of that alley, the history of displacement of African American alley dwellings took place all across the city. And now those spaces you can't touch them. People pay the top dollar to live in them. So it's appropriate that you've chosen this and you know that. And I also think it's quite a radical site for you to choose. This neighborhood currently, as you know, is in high demand. Economically, it's displaced anyone who works for a living. I'm very impressed by that. I also, and you may be familiar with this, given all the research you've done, DC has a program now where they're designing structures, buildings for, they're temporary structures for homeless families. And they're doing them currently now, if you're homeless in the district, and you can stop me if you already know this, you live at DC General, so anyone who's homeless lives in them. But now they're creating in every ward different sites, a similar program to what you have, just for families. So, and giving the services to families. And they're about the size, the footprint, let's say 30,000 square feet, a little bit more, because it serves 30 to 50 families. But what I am so excited about, what you offer that's so unique to the program, is adding this component of a market or some kind of art, unique space that engages the site and is not just about the families, but everyone. It's not just kind of a one-off building, but it's a building that's about housing and other activities. So I'm really impressed by that. I think it's really unique. It's very personal, but wow, what a great idea. I think you could add a little more density to house more people on top. You know, go ahead, do it. You'll fight the neighbors tooth and nail just to get this done. But that's, you know, I can tell you more stories about all those different. So I have only a few thoughts to offer in terms of, you know, when you spend the summer working on your thesis. One is to consider the families a little bit more. Their space needs are different. This neighborhood, as you know, has very little park space. Like, I think Mount Vernon Square is the only green space near there. So perhaps your gallery of displacement could be something you internalize into the architecture of the building. You know, you have a beautiful architectural idea of nothing screens and scaffolding. You know, maybe that becomes part of your stairs and this really interesting procession you have through it. And maybe that's public space for kids to play in, or, you know, I'd be a little more thoughtful about that, just because it's almost as if you created a whole other project there, and it's not quite married to what you're doing. So that's one comment. I definitely would design it, go ahead and design it as one building. Forget the little slot, you know. Maybe that's part of the secondary experience within the building, but plain that's yeah, I think that's all I have to offer, so congratulations. Thank you.
When you made your presentation, which was very, you know, excellent, well done. The presentation was very well done, and you had a quote that talked about belonging and the idea that, and there was a diagram that showed 3 interconnected volumes, and the idea that those that are displaced are not part of where they are, and they're not part of where they left, right? So I thought that that was what you were trying to get at with this gallery of displacement, but I'm not quite getting it. And I was wondering if there's other places in your project where you were trying to wrestle with that idea or to express that idea.
I think it's something that I wanted to explore, and maybe this was looking at it too literally, but in the terms of the thresholds between the two spaces. So the idea of like just where you are, depending on like the threshold between the market, the dwelling, the threshold between the public realm to the outside realm, like just in terms of thresholds, but not necessarily. Like, I understand what you mean, but that is very interesting.
Sorry, and not to beat a dead horse, but I will. I'm still confused about the notion of the 2 galleries and the public versus private aspect of the one that's nuzzled into the building. You're making such a bold statement by saying this gallery of displacement is a moment in the neighborhood, right? You're talking about scaffolding in a very poetic way that you've created this jewel in the alley. But then there's this annex within the building, and there's, you know, are they competing with each other? Because you said it's for people within the building, then the public probably shouldn't have access to it. I'm actually thinking, does it need to be a gallery, or can it be another program? And just leave the memories and the stories that these people want to tell in this garden, this beautiful garden that you've created. Because I'm looking at some of the renderings and stuff, I'm like, oh, this is how I learn about their journey and where they're headed and what their aspirations are. I don't need to then go in the building and then have the story told in a different way. It could be a completely different program. Then it makes us really, truly special, as opposed to a competing similar program within the building. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's a reason why.
Part of the reasoning is because it might have been left over from another iteration. So there's an iteration where it went underground and it came up, so that's maybe why that part isn't as resolved.
Fair.
I agree with Me-Day. It's a beautiful structure, and I love the sort of ephemeral quality of the scaffold around it. But to Maria's point where, you do have families with children, they need some outdoor space to play, you sort of wonder if that could have been, I like the idea of a building there, but I just wonder if you really need 2 gallery spaces and what that could be as, active space for families, couples, and children, as an outdoor space to meet everyone together.
So it's a great point, because one thing that you hinted at in your entourage is this 5th elevation, which is the roof, right? And you're showing activity and people flying kites. Just make a stand. So that's going to be a playground, almost like, almost Corbu-esque in a way, or like you look at like Kowloon, which is not a great example, but they use that roof surface just because of scarcity of space as a playground. If that's going to be a play, because you're already showing kids flying kites there, just be bold and say, okay, that's my playground.
And just quickly,
It's becoming a requirement to have to put a certain amount of green area on a roof.
You say I never give you a microphone. Hope somebody photographed that.
So I'm trying to imagine how this might happen. So apparently some wealthy, I won't get this right, immigrant or migrant, or somebody, came, had a tough time, then they made a ton of money, and they provided the economic opportunity to do this, in a heartfelt way. Then this raises 2 questions in my mind. One question is, if I've come from a lesser circumstance, why would I ever want to leave this place? I mean, this specific place. How do you get me out of here?
Has to be part of the rules.
You see what I mean?
That's the part of the rules.
How do you get me out of here, And then the other thing that worries me, actually, that sort of brought up before, I can understand the attractiveness of this block and wanting to do something here. But the way a lot of the public would tend to read this, not knowing that this was paid for by this wealthy person, would just make a huge number of the already angry population even more angry. And so since this is a very political situation that you're responding to, a political environment, a hyped up kind of political environment, I would worry that the intention to be helpful and generous might actually backfire and have broader negative consequences.
So that's a reason not to do it? Are you saying that's a reason not to do it?
No, it's a reason to be very careful about where it's located. And I don't pretend to know the answer to that. But immediately when you were introducing the project and told me where the site was, I wondered if it might be really a good idea to put it right next to the Holocaust Museum. In order that you would directly understand the consequences of not being generous with your immigration policies.
So the DC program I'm talking about, this is exactly what's been going on. Sorry. This is exactly what's been going on in every ward. So the idea is that every ward has to take responsibility for homeless families. And we're not going to hide people away. And so what's fascinating is see how people come up with incredible excuses why this can't happen in their neighborhood. And in this case, it took a lot of initiative. It took a lot of political leadership to make it happen. so the current mayor's making it happen. And it also required the city to own the property. So the city's identified different sites. So, here's choosing the site, let's say the city owned that. So it's possible. And then they have to have a political leadership. And then, you talk to your friend from the previous thesis, activists, including myself, got together, and we all got together with different people in different boards, initiatives and that sort of thing, showed up at public meetings, and we needed the building, and said, well, these are the reasons why we need it. And so the people that were the fearmongers, believe me, the kind of things people would say, like this is a threat to homeland security, just everything, these children are going to be in my children's school, crazy stuff. It can happen. That's why I look at this and I'm like, well, this is really feasible. This is happening now. But you've added something really unique that works with the site, these other components. So I could spend here. Anyway, Steve, don't worry.
We planned it.
It can happen. It's happening now.
Go over to Renee, pass it back this way. I just want to continue on that.
Okay. I too believe that we can't operate that way. But Nayab, I don't know if you know this, but the person who had the vision for Blagden Alley was Suzanne Reddick. And Suzanne is an immigrant herself, and she just completed the building on the corner. You have a picture of it over there. It's around the corner, I think, there. That's the one with the beautiful brick on N Street.
I actually talked to her daughter, Nuni, when I was first starting this.
So I think this would be a project you should share with her. And I think the idea, I totally agree that the idea of actually offering this kind of site for people who are coming to our country and welcoming them. I do think there needs to be a structure that people understand it's for a certain amount of time, but then also the help to move in and be integrated into other parts of the city or of the state or whatever. And I just wanted to compliment you on the project. It's been really a pleasure to be under you.
I'm going to give this to the thesis chair, and then we're going to congratulate Nayab, and then we're going to break into a little session where we're just going to do some summarial comments. And I'll save my comment. It's not so much about you, but it's about a bigger group.
Thank you. So Nayab, thank you for a wonderful year. I really enjoyed working with you. I think when I look at you, I see that you're incredibly poetic and artistic. You have a talent and an eye, artistic eye. And one of the things I think you did really rigorously in this thesis was translate your poetic ideas into architectural elements. So, the fact that you rigorously mined the interviews to come up with the timeline, and then you have this case study typology that ultimately got you to 3 very clear architectural elements. I think I really appreciated your process and how you translated a bigger theoretical idea into architecture. I also think the strength of this thesis project is that it is about geography and place, right? Your big idea is actually about something that architecture specifically as a discipline can address, place, right? And so I think that makes it a particularly strong Master of Architecture thesis project. And I want to congratulate you on coming up with the idea and